So let's just draw a hoof capsule that is well balanced. Here we go. There's the coronary band. The horse has the maximum surface area from here to here. We've talked about this before. This part of the horse's toe, the toe pillar, is on the ground. This is very, very, very important, because without that toe pillar on the ground and without the feedback to the papillae in the coronary band, which are up here, this hoof wall growth will begin to slow down. So we have a hoof capsule, it's well balanced. This horse's foot is well balanced. It has P3 inside, here we go, here's P3, and we have a well-defined distance here between the actual true heel of the horse's foot and the angle, or the palmar processes, which defines the angle of P3. That is defined by the horse. The sole thickness is defined by the horse, and we know this because we follow something called the HSP, which is the hard sole plane. Now this is very misunderstood, this information, because people don't really know what the hard sole plane is, but people don't know where to find it, and it's very confusing when a horse has had compaction and pathology and issues in the foot. But if you follow this constantly, correctly, that is the only constant, the only parameter that will give you perfect balance in the horse's foot. Sadly, that's not what happens. This foot here is balanced. The horse has P3 in the right position. All is good. The laminae down here that are connected are not separated. Now this horse could have systemic issues, and we know that that can cause problems throughout the entire horse. It can cause problems through the gut, it can cause problems hormonally, it can cause big issues. We also know that it can have an effect here on the laminae. But what it doesn't do is it does not cause P3 to rotate. And I want you to focus on one major aspect. We're going back to this frog location, the apex of the frog. We want to think about that and its relation to the tip of P3. This again is inextricably linked. Just like the heels are to the palmar processes in P3, they are synchronized. They cannot be parted because the frog grows from the corium that's underneath the sole. So they can't be parted. It's incredibly important that this bit is understood. So if you come along and you allow these heels to begin to underrun, and we've talked about this before, and then you decide that you think that this foot needs to, the toe needs to be removed, thereby putting extra forces here on the sole, which begins to form a sole callus right below the tip of P3, you then have a situation where your balance point, you've allowed these heels to grow, your balance point is off. So rather than this growing down like this, what happens is the hoof capsule begins to change. And that becomes your new balance point. The horse is now walking on this plane instead of that plane. And it continues, it gets worse. The more that this is removed, the more that sole is reduced. And it continues. The more these heels either stay the same or end up getting longer. That heads towards Coke can foot territory. This hoof growth is now slowing right down at the dorsal wall, and this is carrying on as per normal. We can see the effect of that when we look at the diverging rings on a horse's hoof capsule that are in this situation. But the moment that begins to happen, this distance here, which is inextricably linked, totally synchronized with the heels, begins to get much wider. What that means is, in relation to this situation now, we have P3. If we turn this foot and I was able to turn my whiteboard around, you'd see P3 was now facing down. But with that foot in that position, an x-ray will be taken, P3 will seem to be rotated, the horse is very, very sore, systemic issues are blamed because they have no hoof history, no x-ray history, nobody takes photos except us, thousands and thousands of them. They do not understand the process that got P3 into that situation. Let's just take this away. So I'm going to draw this back in again. And I'm going to draw the hoof capsule. I'm going to draw P3 rotated in the hoof capsule. Here we go. So this is the x-ray that's now done. And they don't appreciate a few things. The hoof capsule should have been like this. In this scenario, you have the heel height pretty much in line with the dorsal wall. That shouldn't happen. The heel height should be half of that. So we look at this situation here and we see that this hatched line that I'm putting in now is too much. That horse was allowed to grow too much heel. And worse than that, because of repeated toe removal, this horse lost its sole depth underneath here. Why? Because when we got to this point here and we were reducing the surface area and we were taking away this toe area, we had no balance point anymore. And this was just then assumed because we have no toe wall. So the horse can't show you where it needs it. You're going off a toe callus on the sole, which is not going to behave the same way as the hoof wall and will not give you an accurate balance point. That's when the horse starts getting into dire straits. But when they x-ray a horse like this, they believe P3 has rotated. But in actual fact, it is the hoof capsule that is causing all the problems. Now, how do we know for absolutely sure that the SADP theory is incorrect? How do we know for sure that just taking the toe off did reduce lever forces, help the horse walk? How do we know these things? How do we know that the heels are so linked, synchronized with the palmar processes? Doesn't matter how much separation there is in the laminae, these are still linked. How do we know that? We know that for a couple of reasons. Because we know that when we come along and we take this away, we take the horse's hoof heels back to where they need to be, and you re-x-ray that horse's foot, because now that horse's foot is now on this plane, not this plane, it's on this plane. When you re-x-ray that horse's foot, P3 is now in a good position. Now, the DDFT theory will tell you that even though P3 has been put in a good position, this is contracting and therefore it's going to just continue to pull P3 through the capsule. Well, we've rehabbed hundreds of these horses and I can tell you 100% that never happens. P3 remains stable as long as you keep the heels back to where they need to be, because remember, this part of P3 and this part of the horse's foot are linked. They can't unlock themselves. Going a little bit further than that, remember, the frog here is linked to where it grows from at the bottom of P3. So just imagine for one moment we were going to accept the theory of the SADP. Let's just say, no, this still is true. And this still is happening, the DDFT. And in fact, if we don't put a wedge on, if we don't relieve the tension, if we don't take the toe off, if we don't that's going to continue to rotate overnight. Now think about this. If these are inextricably linked, and these are inextricably linked, how overnight is P3, let's do it in blue, is P3 going to rotate even more? How can that happen? you'd have to be watching the frog, because the frog would also have to move back that way. Now that doesn't happen. It's anatomically impossible. So if the frog is stuck quite fixed in the sole and it cannot move, you could take photograph after photograph after photograph of the sole, it doesn't move, then how on earth can P3 move? It can't. It can't just tear its way through the frog. And we know this because every single x-ray that's ever been done of a horse with rotated P3s has the frog right behind it, just there. So how did that happen? How did the frog happen to go from here to there overnight? It can't. It's literally impossible. It's an optical illusion. What actually happens is the heels grow underrun and the surface area gets shortened. And as this keeps being taken and removed, and this area here keeps getting thinned, thinner and thinner and thinner, that is what rotates P3. And we can prove it every single time, because we can take animals that have rotated P3s, we can remove the heel, we can put down to where that horse wants it. So effectively you are realigning to P3, you are realigning to this area here. Now that's well known, in fact. They know about realigning, but they've got so confused with this and this that they think that, no, if you do that, that's going to cause more pain, and you must take this off because this is going to cause more tearing. We've proven time and time and time and time again that does not happen. So just like all the vets and all the research scientists and all the farriers that don't have any x-ray proof because they've never proved it in a peer-reviewed paper, they'll tell you they have. Go looking, you'll never find one. They talk about it, they posit a theory, they make assumptions, and they've never proved it. Those very recent, and we're talking in the 2020s, experiments where they have overdosed horses with oligofructose, right back to the early 2000s with black walnut extract, etc. They've still never been able to get P3 to rotate unless that cadaver has been removed and they put that laminae through thermal shock. So how do you rehab the horse's foot? So this horse has got high heels. The coronary band is high. Sometimes it's even inverted. The P3 is about to penetrate, and we have a situation like this. We have the heels pretty much the same height as what's going on at the dorsal wall. Of course, that's not at all feasible. The actual hoof capsule should have been like this, but through continual toe removal, it got lost. And by allowing the heels to keep rising up, the hoof capsule itself was distorted. So what we do is we come along and we lower these heels to the right position in alignment with P3. And now we have, goes about to about there, in alignment with P3. So we're in here. That hoof automatically then is in the correct position. The heels are low where they're supposed to be. People freak out that heels are too low. We're not guessing. We're taking them down to the HSP. And in situations with compacted hooves, we are having x-rays where P3 is getting realigned. But then we have this problem here. We have the fact that there still isn't enough material under P3, so we have to let this grow. Every time we take these heels back, that toe begins to stick up. So every single time we measure these heels, we make sure they're at the same point, and eventually what we're after is this whole foot beginning to be in alignment. Let's just do it like this actually, which means that it will expose the lamellar wedge, which is here. But that's okay, because the second you get that toe on the ground, you've already got a healing angle coming in, which by that point will be well down the hoof. This is where the laminae are connecting much tighter now. All because we've now put P3 in the right position. This therefore starts to look long, but it's absolutely fine, and the horses do absolutely fine. This is not tearing lamina. It never did, and it never will. And the only people on the earth that can prove that are people who are rehabbing horses the way that we do. And we have X-ray proof that that realigns P3, and that P3 remains stable and does not move. It doesn't matter that there's still a load of separation here. P3 doesn't move. It doesn't matter that the DDFT is still fixed. Let's have it around here. The DDFT is still fixed here, and there's still separation at the front. As soon as these heels come down, which links this to this, P3 is stable with a great big lamella wedge. But that's okay, because it begins to grow out. And as it grows out, it connects, and there's been no research on how incredible tissue responds to heal again, and it begins to grow out until you have the foot back to where it needed to be in the right orientation, and all of this has gone. And in some instances, in some awful, terrible instances, P3 has gone through osteonecrosis, which has removed the tip of P3 because of constant removal of the toe wall, causing this area to have incredible pressure. It starves itself as that circumflex artery is pressed upon, and it has no more blood supply. So it begins to die. At that point then, the hoof wall really only can grow as far as that, well connected. And in these horses, you tend to see, they tend to do this. So we've got P3 back in the right position in terms of the heels, but the toe does this. This doesn't hurt the horse. It looks bizarre, but it doesn't hurt the horse. What we care about is this stopping and the osteonecrosis ending. Okay. That's a bit of a scribble, isn't it? I hope that lesson, that it's not rocket science lesson, and we'll break that down even more, I think, in the future, in more It's Not Rocket Science lesson. But I hope that makes you understand that the SADP theory is incorrect. The P3 is most definitely not suspended in the capsule. In fact, the whole of the capsule acts as a weight distribution for P3 inside. It does not suspend. The DDFT cannot and does not pull P3 through the capsule. It has no ability to do that because it cannot tear the palmar processes, that end of P3, away from its heel. It can't do that. It's impossible. The heel remains completely synchronized with P3. The higher the heel, the more compacted the heel, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about compaction of horn. The more P3 elevates. So it cannot do that either. This science, this bogus science with absolutely no definitive papers on this earth that definitively prove that this happens, has rooted itself in the equine world and caused the deaths of millions and millions of horses. Because when a vet sees P3 rotated or about to penetrate the hoof capsule here, they believe that this happened and that this is also happening. And we've proved over and over again that that is impossible. Once you realign P3 and take the compaction of the heels away, this stops. Then you allow P3 to grow, you allow the toe wall to grow, depth is created, and everything comes back to normal. Hoof care is on its knees in the equine world, and if you have a horse that has rotation, that your vet is telling you that you have to chop the toes off to stop lever forces, or you have to put wedges in to release the tension on the DDFT, come back to this lesson. Or tell your vet or your farrier to look at this lesson. Tell them to go and research through all the journals, all the science journals like I have done and like we have done. Tell him to go and research and find out where all the evidence is that supports these theories. They're theories, they're not facts, and this has caused a huge problem in the equine world. Well, I hope you enjoyed that lesson. It's a bit of a scary one, and I hope that through all these rocket science lessons and through joining the Phoenix group and from understanding the truth behind hoof care, that we will stop this bogus information taking more root in the equine world. It needs to stop now, and hoof care needs to get better. I'm Lindsay Setchell. I hope you enjoyed this. Goodbye until next time. Bye-bye.